Okay, welcome everyone. As we are sponsored by A.B. Spry for nachas from the entire family, by Baruch Ian Lili Nishmas Yaakov Chaim and Abba Estabas Gittel Avram Ben Shmuel HaKohen, by Ed Sal from London, Joshua Rosenberg, virtual Talmud, Yaakov Umansky for in honor of the Rav and the Zoom family, and from nachas from the family, by Shalom Fogel and Lishmas Rabbi Yaakov Zebra and Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh, Ma'as Rivka Bas Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, Ma'as Sivya Miriam Bas Rav Gad, and Rabbi Yosef Ben Zion Ben Rabbi Yaakov Zev. Tonight is the yahrzeit of the Neshama Yisera of my father, Rabbi Tzvi Ben Rameir. The yahrzeit is this coming week, Gimel Av. We'll learn that his Neshama should have a great aliyah. We had a little bit of a hot Shabbos as the air conditioner froze over, but Baruch Hashem, right after Shabbos, we just got a pound and a half of Freon, and it's cool again in honor of the Olam. We welcome in A.B. Spry and Eddie Chazan, Berish Gesseman, Aaron Swade, Stephen Holtzman, Nachman Chapler, Saba, Dr. Guy, Israel Fisher, Dr. Black, and Mark Frankel is back, and Irving Fishbaum, and Ben-Zion Cohn, Sheldon Zeitlin, Yitzi Fuchs, Moshe Lehman, Daniel Rosenberg is with us, Yitzi Muller, Chaim Braun, Ilya Shutman. We also welcome in David Helfgott, who's on Kol Lashon, and we are holding on Daf Lamed Zayin Amid Beis, two lines from the bottom of Daf Lamed Zayin Amid Beis. Imrei Nardoi, the people of Narda, the sages of Narda said, Hai man de zoven dikla lechavre. So over here, the wheeling, dealing Eddie Chazan sells to Mark a palm tree, a date palm. Date palm is a valuable commodity. So he sells to Mark a date palm. Kanile, he acquires it, Mishipule, from its edge, ad Tahaima, all the way down to China, which means that if it dies, he could replant it, and if Eddie wants to do any work underground and put in pipes and different things, he cannot do it under the date palm, because that date palm is a thing that belongs completely to Mark. Now, Maskava Rava. So Rava, he is concerned about Eddie's well-being, and he says, I just sold you like a garden crocus or a garden saffron. People buy garden saffrons and they uproot it. So here he told Mark, I sold it to you, and when it dies, vamoose, just like a kurkuma derishka vizil, that you have to uproot the garden saffron and leave. So here too, I sold you the date palm when it's viable. When it's not, pluck it out and goodbye. Rava says, something? Mark doesn't have these rights. Mishipula toima. No. Biba machmas taina. Here, it's talking about where Mark comes with a claim that he arranged with Eddie that he wants to have it for perpetuity, and that if something happens, he could grow another date palm. So now, again, Rava seems to be, unlike so many other people, Rava seems to be very concerned about Eddie. And Rava says, but let's say Eddie Taka only sold it to him for its use like a kurkuma derishka. So how will he protect himself? Amalei Mar Kishisha Breder of Chisler of Ashivi Kurka de Rishka Zavenlei. If he sold it to him only for its momentary use, only until it dies, then how could he protect himself if Mark is going to claim that he bought it for perpetuity? So the Gemara says, well, the first 3 years, Mark should have a shtar. Since the norm is that it's sold kikurkama derishka, he should have a shtar saying that he was sold the land rights. But after 3 years, Mark doesn't have to keep the paper. And the day palm is going to live more than 3 years. So the Gemara says, yeah, then every 3 years, Eddie has to lodge a protest saying, you should know I didn't send him the land. So this way, Mark will always have to keep the paper. And that's a responsibility that lies on Eddie. If we don't say that there's the eitzah to lodge a protest, Hani Mashkanta the Surah. We brought this proof before. If let's say, Berish gave a $10,000 loan to Yisrael Fisher, and Yisrael gave him his land for 10 years with the arrangement that he can use the land for 10 years and then the debt will be paid, and then he returns him the land. Hani Mashkanta the Surah, the collateral of Surah, the Kosev Bahachi, where it's written, B'mishlin Shanya Elin, at the end of these 10 years, Tefek Aradabaloy Kesef, then you return me the land, and you don't owe me any money. Now, if Berish hides the collateral document and then claims that he bought it because he used it 10 years, if he hides the shtar mashkanta, and he says, well, I bought it, and not only do I have it 3 years, I have it 10 years, and he would be believed. Miskane Rabbanan Milsa, would Rabbanan enact such an arrangement as a Miskanta the Surah, the Asabali de Pseda, that Yisrael could lose his land, but rather Yisrael has the option, he has to protest every 3 years that it's not that the land belongs to Berish, he just has it with a Mashkanta arrangement, and therefore if Berish wants to claim that he bought the land, he would have to still keep his paper even after 10 years. If indeed there is that Eddie only gave the tree to Mark to use until it dies, then every 3 years he has to protest and say, look, I only gave it to you until it dies. And that way, if Mark actually bought it with an arrangement, Mishipula ad Tohema, from its base until China, all the way down, then he would have to keep the shtar. Now, here is the old case where, I mean, it's just, you just can't help it, but this is the old story. And that is that Mark has land, and Shelley is occupying it. So Mark says, Shelley, what are you doing in my land? So Shelley says, what do you mean? I bought it. So Mark says, where's your shtar? So Shelley says, well, I was occupying it 3 years. You didn't lodge a protest, and therefore I didn't keep my paper. Therefore, then Shelley has a cheskes gimel shanim, and Mark is up the creek without any land. That's the classic case of a cheskes gimel shanim. But now the plot thickens. Let's say that Shelley occupies Mark's land in Yehuda, but Mark is in the upper Galil. So in that case, the Mishnah is going to tell us that Shelley doesn't have a chazakah. Why? because Mark is not going to bother protesting, because even though he might find out about Shelley's occupancy, but all the way from the Upper Galil, Shelley will not hear about the protest. So therefore, Mark doesn't bother protesting, knowing that Shelley will have to keep his paper, because he knows that there's no way for Mark to issue a protest. So he can't say, well, I had it 3 years and he didn't issue a protest. And we're going to see that there's 3 regions for Chazakah. And these 3 regions for Chazakah, Shelley has to assume that if the Morikama, the original owner, is in one of the other districts, he's not going to bother to protest, because there's no way for Shelley for it to get to Shelley. And therefore Shelley will have to keep his paper. And if he doesn't keep his paper, then he has to return it to Mark. So let's see this inside. And we've just been joined by, what's his name, from Chicago? Yitzi Muller has come in. And I don't know who Inish Loraisa is, but Abe Arbach has joined us. And we're joined by Marshall Castle. Richard Rosenzweig is with us. Phil Greenberg is with us. So anyway, says the new Mishnah, Shalosh Haratzos l'Chazaka, there's 3 districts for Chazaka: Yehuda, Ever HaYarden, the Transjordan, this week's Parsha, V'Galil, and the Upper Galil. Hoya Yehuda, if let's say Mark, the Morikama, the owner, was in Yehuda, V'Hirzik B'Galil, his land in the Galil, Shelley occupied it, or the other way around, Mark was in the Galil, but V'Hirzik B'Yehuda, but Shelley occupied his land in Yehuda, then ain't a Chazaka. He cannot rely that he occupied it with 3 years without Mark issuing a protest, because Mark is not going to bother to issue a protest because it's not going to reach Shelley. And therefore it's not a Chazaka ad sheyeh imay b'medina achas, unless he's with him in the same province. Now Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says that, you know why we normally, Rabbi Yehuda Namish has a whole different opinion than our whole parak till now. Rabbi Yehuda holds that if Shelley is occupying Mark's land in front of him even for 1 day, and Mark doesn't say anything, then Shelley could claim that it's his. But why do we need 3 years? That the Morikama is in Aspamia, is in Spain. Mark is in Spain. V'yarzik shana, Shelley will occupy his land in Eretz Yisrael for 1 year. Yelchu v'yodiu shana, it's going to take another year for the news to reach Mark. And then v'yovei l'shana acheres, and then he'll come back and make a protest another year. That's why it takes 3 years. Now, again, remember, and this is important, I gave you the understanding of the Mishnah, that the reason why Shelley, who's occupying Mark's land, has to be in the same district is because if Shelley is in Yehuda, occupying Mark's land in Yehuda, and Mark is in the Upper Galil, even though Mark will find out about it, but he's not going to bother to issue a protest because the protest won't get to Shelley. And since it won't get to Shelley, he's not going to bother protesting, and therefore Shelley can say, well, he didn't protest. Rather, Shelley has to keep the paper even longer than 3 years. So, my Kasavar Tanakama, ask Gemara, what does the Tanakama hold? If he holds that a protest issued not in the occupier's presence is a good protest, so then afilu Yehuda v'Galil nami. Then even if the Marikama is in faraway Galil, he could still issue a protest in front of two witnesses. Why shouldn't he protest? Mecha shaloi b'fanav havi mecha. And ikasava mecha shaloi b'fanav lo havi mecha, even if a mecha not in his presence is not a good mecha, then afilu Yehuda v'Yehuda namilai. Even if he's in one city of Yehuda to another city, it's not easy to travel from one city to another city. So we should say he has to keep his paper because he's far away, and he's not going to bother issuing a protest because a protest not in the presence of the owner of the occupier is not a good protest. So the Gemara says, no. Normally, a protest issued not in the person's presence is a good protest. Why? Because even though Mark didn't issue it in the presence of Shelley, but we say chavracha chavra islay, v'chavra de chavracha chavra islay. Your friends have friends, and the friends of your friends also have friends. And by playing telephone, by the power of gossip, the word would get back to Shelley. However, u'mishnaseinu b'shas cheirum shana. Our Mishnah is talking about during wartime. So the Gemara says if it's wartime, then and news doesn't travel and won't reach him, then it should even be from Yehuda to Yehuda. Or Ma'ishna Yehuda v'Galil denakit. Says the Gemara, no. What we mean is Hakamash Malan, the Stam Yehuda v'Galil k'shas cheirim dam. That Yehuda and Galil is so far away that you cannot rely on the news getting to Shelley, even as Rashbam says, afilu b'shas shalom. And therefore, like we explained, therefore Mark, since he's so far away and knows his protest is not going to get to Shelley, doesn't bother protesting. So Shelley can't say, well, I didn't keep my paper because he didn't bother to protest. So there Shelley has to keep his paper even after 3 years, and if he doesn't, then he has to return the land to Mark. Now, what about if Mark, the Marikama, is a fugitive? You know, what about if Mark, you see, look at this, he blocks himself out like a real fugitive, right? So let's say that Mark is a fugitive. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, ein machzikin b'nichsei bareach. You cannot, Shelley cannot make a chazaka in the property of a fugitive. Now the idea is because since he is on the run, so he's not going to issue a protest. So since he's on the run, he's not going to issue a protest. So therefore, Shelley should have kept the paper. So ki amri say kamei de Shmuel amalei. When I said this before Shmuel, he says I don't understand. V'chi limchos b'fanav hu tzarich. Does he have to go and protest to Shelley? If he would have to go and protest to Shelley, so he says he's a fugitive, he's not going to travel to Shelley, so therefore he can't protest. But if you hold mecha shalei b'fanav having mecha, then he could protest wherever he is. He could even protest on the run. So what does Rav hold? V'Rav ma'ikamash malan that mecha shalei b'fanav lo having mecha, that you can't issue a protest not in the occupier's presence. and that therefore a fugitive can't do that because he's not able to go to Shelley. But v'amar Rav mecha sheloi b'fanav havi mecha. Rav holds mecha sheloi b'fanav is a good mecha. Says, well, no. Rav taima the Tana didon kama farish. Rav, when he said that, was explaining the Tanakama of our Mishnah, who holds mecha sheloi b'fanav havi mecha. But v'lei lo yisvirulei. Rav himself doesn't hold that way. Rav holds that you have to tell the occupier. And therefore, since Mark is a fugitive, he cannot go travel to the occupier. And therefore, Shelley will have to keep the paper. There's another version. The Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav that you can make a chazaka even though Mark is on the run. When this was said before Shmuel, Amali, he said to me, Pshita, that's obvious. Just because he's a Bereach doesn't mean he can't issue a protest from wherever he is. Does he need to protest in the presence of the occupier? He just has to say protest from wherever he is, and we say Chavrecha Chavre Yislay, V'Chavre Chavrecha Chavre Yislay. So of course you could make a chazaka on the property of a fugitive. So the Gemara says, and Rav, what was his chiddush? Rav Maikamash Malon, Mecha Shalei B'Fanav Avi Mecha, that you could issue a protest even not in the presence of the occupier. Va'amra Rav Chodazimna. So the Gemara says Rav is saying an extra chiddush over here. Rav is telling us that Mark, who now has shown his face, even though he's a fugitive, he's finally shown his face. You have a handsome face. Elohakam Ashmalan. This teaches us Da'afilu micha b'fnei beis, that even if Mark issues a protest in front of him, Mark is a wise guy. He issues a protest in front of two lame witnesses. Two people in a wheelchair. So they're not getting the news to Shelley. Or two people that were about to travel to Australia. So they're not going to be able to directly tell Shelley, why? Because even though they won't tell Shelley, but they're going to tell Rabbi Kranz and Abi, and Rabbi Kranz and Abi is going to tell Marshall and Daniel Rosenberg, and the word is going to get back to Shelley. If you protest in front of two people that could tell Shelley, but Rav, nah, even if they're two lame people, the friend of your friend has a friend, your friend has a friend, and the friend of your friend has a friend. Amarava. Hilkasa. The law is that if Mark is on the run, then Shelley cannot occupy his land, meaning that even if he occupies it for 3 years, he has to keep the paper. But if Mark gives a protest not in Shelley's presence, it's a good protest. So the Gemara says, Tarte, that's a contradiction. Because if Mark could give a protest not in Shelley's presence, then he could do it even if he is a fugitive. So why are you telling me that if he's a fugitive, it's not a good chazaka? Why? Mark could issue a protest from where he is if Mecha Shaloi B'Fanav Avi Mecha. So the Gemara says, like Kasha, Kan B'Reach Machmas Mama. If he's only under the run for money, he's not going to stop from issuing a protest where he is. But Kan B'Reach Machas Mardin. But if he's on the run because he murdered somebody, then he's not going to want to divulge where his location is. So then he would be afraid to protest wherever he is. In that case, even though normally Mecha Shalei B'fanav having Mecha, but Mark will be afraid to issue a protest. So then Shelley is going to have to keep the paper because he can't say Mark didn't issue a protest, because he would know that Mark is not issuing a protest because he's afraid of being discovered, his location is being discovered, he's in a witness protection plan, and therefore, you didn't know that, Rabbi Say, that's why sometimes, it looks like he's coming from Bala Kinwood, but it's really somewhere from Somalia, I think. It's amazing that he's still able to smile. And his real name isn't really Mark Frankel. I think it's Baruch Bosnisky, but but anyway.
How's Shelley supposed to know that? I mean, he would have had to buy it when he was running away already. But let's say that happened later.
No, the fact that a person is on the run has occurred. Now, we're just going to pause a moment to change the channel over here.